So we're here to talk about police reforms and public safety. Now, we're here today because we flatly reject the extremes that we're hearing on opposite sides of this issue. The slurs against police officers aren't right and are unjustified. At the same time, the calls and the words that I've heard about victims of police violence deserving what they get are just as unjustified and are just as wrong. We reject both of those extremes. And we know that there is a better way forward and a strategic way forward. When you look at the incidents of police violence throughout the country, particularly in Minneapolis, we have to acknowledge that while our police department is not perfect, you look at police departments such as Minneapolis, and they would love to be where we're at today. Providence has been leading the way for 20 years in community policing and building relationships with the community and working together to drive down crime and to meet the needs of our community. I know that two things can be true. It is absolutely the case that we have one of the best forward-thinking police departments in the country, while at the same time, what has happened in other places can happen anywhere, and we can and must do and be better. So with that in mind, we are partnering with PFM, who's done some work for the city in the past, and they're going to take a comprehensive look and in effect do an administrative audit to understand how it is that our police department functions. What are the calls that come in? What calls for service do we receive? What hours do they come in? Are they for mental health? Are they for loud noise? Are they for violent crime, etc.? They'll also be looking at how our officers are being asked to use their time. How much of their time is spent doing administrative work? How much are they responding to, say, fender bender car accidents? And how much of their time are they actually engaged to exercise their training and to actually address crime in our community? We're also going to look at administrative efficiencies. Are there ways that we can improve our processes to better support and to better meet the needs of our community? Throughout this process, we're committing to engaging the community in it. As PFM goes about its work, we also want to engage in our community to make sure that we're addressing all of the right issues and addressing them in a way that positions the city of Providence for success. So we're going to be asking our entire community to come together and help us understand the needs at the grassroots and at the neighborhood level. Through this process, we hope to accomplish two core things. First, the police officers have been asked to do more and more over the decades than they ever had before. Policing is incredibly difficult, and it's only become more difficult over time. We ask our police officers to not just do regular police work, but we also ask them to be mental health counselors. We ask them to be mentors. We ask them to be coaches. We ask them to respond in all of these different ways that they aren't specifically trained for in many circumstances. So what we want to do through this is also free up our police officers' time so that they can spend more of their time responding to the direct and immediate needs of the community. At the same time, the second primary goal is we also want to provide the services to the community that can best meet those needs. We know at the current time that if someone calls because a family member is having a mental breakdown or a mental episode, we send the police, frankly, because we don't have any other services out there to send. So we want to know exactly what the needs are and make sure that we're providing those services to better meet the needs of the community. So those are our two goals. And I am confident that Providence is going to continue to lead the way. The reason why crime is at an all-time low today as we speak is because 20 years ago, the city of Providence, under the leadership of Mayor Cicilline and Dean Esserman, they went all in on community policing. Community policing at that time, it was resisted, it was shunned, and it was dismissed. But the city committed to it, we stuck with it, and look at where we stand now. Thankfully, we haven't had any of the incidents that other cities have seen, and crime, as I mentioned, is at historic lows. That is what put us on a path towards being one of the best and forward-thinking police departments in the country. But we can't be satisfied. There's still much more to do. And as we think about what policing looks like into the future and how we're going to get there, this is an inflection point. And this is a moment where we will make the investments so that we are on the cutting edge and we are forward thinking so we can continue to meet the needs of our community in public safety and beyond. So I will pause there and I'll open it up to questions.
Okay, we have a question from Bill Bartholomew. Bill, I'm going to unmute you now.
Hi, good afternoon, Mayor. How much of this announcement is a reaction or a response to the folks that turned out at City Hall for a city council meeting earlier this year, that large, you can think about that wrap around the building, the recent protests that we've seen over the summer? How much is this a response from that sector, and how much of this is a response to what you're hearing from inside the public safety complex?
So I think it's, I would say that this is very much a response to all of us witnessing the horrific George Floyd video. The entire country has come together on the issue, and we know that we've seen these videos in the past. But what's different about George Floyd is that not a single person, not a single human being that I've come in contact with could justify or rationalize what we all saw on video. That man was murdered at the hands of police officers on camera. And I think that awakened a lot of folks for the need for deep structural reform and deep change. And so as a response from that, we want to make sure that we're on the cutting edge of policing as well. And while I believe we're light years ahead of other departments, I also know that what happened in Minneapolis and what's happening in other cities, it can happen anywhere. So we have to be constantly vigilant and constantly moving the ball forward so that we're on the cutting edge As I mentioned just a second ago, Providence has been on the cutting edge. For 20 years, we were an early adopter of community policing. And just as there were naysayers and there were folks who rejected the idea back then, there are folks that say, let's just keep things the way they are right now. But the status quo is not an answer. We have the opportunity to stay on the front lines and be the most forward-thinking police department in the country. And that's how we intend to position ourselves.
Next, we have Steph Machado. Steph, I'm going to unmute you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So Mayor, can you explain the decision to do this for the entire public safety budget? Did you think that there was more savings you could find on the fire side or the EMA side? And how much money realistically do you think or efficiencies can be found knowing how much of these budgets are made up of salaries and benefits?
So just one thing before I jump into the meat of the question. So this process isn't necessarily to find savings. This process is intended to help us reallocate those dollars so that we can better meet the needs of the community. So I don't know if the end product of this will be savings, but I do certainly intend that the end product of this will be a better positioned public safety apparatus that we have to respond to the needs. So when we first started down this path, there was a consensus among my team, and I believe just as much as well, that it should be all of public safety, because handling these things in isolation just isn't going to get it done. These are such complicated issues, and while we typically think of sending the police department, perhaps there is someone else that we can deploy. Perhaps in certain circumstances, it could be the fire department, but perhaps it's an entirely separate service that we develop as part of public safety. So we want this to be comprehensive, and we want it to be as effective as possible. And that's why we're not limiting it just to the police department. This is about meeting the public safety needs of our community, and for that, it really takes a comprehensive approach.
I know you say the goal isn't just to find savings, but it is in the first sentence of the press release that it's potentially going to be savings and efficiencies. You will need to find money in order to provide these other services that you're talking about. I'm just wondering how much wiggle room is there in these budgets?
Yeah, so that's fair. The idea is indeed to find efficiencies, but it's also how do we reinvest those efficiencies into providing better services. As we dive into this, no one knows, and that's why we want to work with PFM in this strategic way. We know that any decisions, any changes that we make to public safety can have truly dramatic consequences, and we're not going to make those important decisions simply shooting in the dark. We need information, we need data, and that's why we're doing this deep dive. So it's incredibly important to go through this exercise, because without it, we wouldn't be able to answer the questions that you just asked, neither now nor at the end of this process. So we want to be strategic, and we want to make sure that we're doing this in the right way. And I think that this is the right comprehensive way to do it.
And just last thing, do you think that this will be able to satisfy the calls for decreasing funding to the police? I know you said there's extremes on both sides, but there's folks that, some folks want to abolish the police, right? But there's folks that want to cut funding to the police. There's 900 or what have you, people that testified about doing so. Do you think this is going to satisfy their concerns?
To be honest, I can't speak to that. And, quite literally, you're going to have to ask them. What my job and my goal in this is to do right by our residents throughout the city. One of my most important goals is one of a mayor's most important priorities is to keep their city safe. And the approach that we're taking is making sure that we're investing holistically in creating that safe city. Just as I believe that the cleanest city is not the city that picks up the most trash, but it's rather the city that prevents the most littering. That's how I believe with public safety as well. The safest city is not the city that arrests the most bad guys. The safest city is the one that can prevent and avoid crime from taking place in the first place. So how do we invest in these areas so that we can prevent crime from developing and us playing catch up? That's what we've been doing in Providence for 20 years. That's what community policing is all about, being proactive rather than reactive. And we want to stay on the front lines of this work. So we want to take this opportunity and make sure that we're thinking about what policing is going to look like 20 years from now. And we start making the investments today that are going to help us get there.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. We've got Steve from Uprise. Steve,
Hi, Mayor. Do you see this work as leading to systemic policing reform in the city? And related to that is the issues of poverty, housing, drug use, and criminalization of some things that might not need to be criminalized. Do you see us tackling that within this context, or is it all going to be financial?
So no, I see us potentially tackling all of this. And this review isn't just financial, and certainly the numbers tell a big story here. But this is also going to look at the administrative processes. It's going to look at the calls coming in. It's going to look at how we deploy resources. It's going to look at every aspect of public safety. So this is going to put us in a position where we can make those very important strategic changes. And look, every institution in our society is infected with institutional racism. It's not just the police department. It's all of public safety, and it's not just public safety. It's every institution in our society. We know that is clear. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're having structural and deep impacting and lasting reforms that undoes that racism and unjust treatment from the past, and creates more of a fair society where everyone feels protected, everyone feels empowered, and everyone has opportunity. So absolutely, what we want to do is we want to be an inflection point so that 20 years from now, we could look back at this moment and look at the decisions that we made collectively as a city, and we set Providence on a path to being one of the most forward-thinking cities and forward-thinking public safety departments in the country. So this is the start. But and the last point that I'll make on this, Steve, is I know that there are many advocates who are calling for change, and they're calling for change now. I'll make 2 points. The first point is there are a number of cities that have announced reforms and changes. As we've watched many of those cities make those reforms and changes, I can assure you that we've kept track, and many of the reforms that they have made, they're reforms that the city of Providence made a decade and more ago. And so that's what I mean about us being on the front lines, being on the front lines historically and wanting to continue to be so. That's one. The second thing that I'll mention is that I know that folks want change and they want change now, but we're talking about systems and institutions that have evolved and developed over decades and sometimes even hundreds of years. You don't turn around an institution and make deep structural institutional change overnight. What we want to do is make sure that we're doing it right. And this analysis, this administrative audit, is the right way to start. Before we start making such important and consequential changes, let's do our research. Let's have our facts together and know exactly what the consequences are going to be rather than shooting in the dark.
And just as a quick follow-up, do you see us doing a similar process with other departments in the city?
So as of right now, our focus is on public safety. I think that's where the greatest urgency is. So that's where we're starting. If you remember, this goes back maybe about 6 years. We also did an administrative audit. I think not as comprehensive, but we did an administrative audit in the school department about 6 years ago. So this is part of a process to improve our systems and improve our departments as best we can. But we also want to be responsive to the urgent need and urgent call for reform specifically around public safety.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. We have Brian Crandall. Brian, I'm going to unmute you.
Thank you, Mayor. You haven't used the word defund. I know people are going to associate this effort with that. That seems to be a conscious decision not to use that term. Is there a reason for that? And obviously, you're not calling for a complete strip down of the police department, correct?
That's right. That's right. And I have never used the word defund, and that's for a couple of reasons. First of all, it hasn't been specifically defined, and also it's become a very charged term. What we're doing is we're being very strategic and doing our research about where we stand right now as a public safety department. And as we think about the needs and the changes, I want to make sure that we're making those very important decisions in an informed and strategic way. So I don't get much into the sort of the ideological back and forth, the rhetoric that's used on all sides. Look, my job as mayor is to get things done. We've done that successfully over the past 6 years in bringing record low levels of crime throughout the city. But we always want to stay on the front lines because we need to do more, and we always have to be open to improving ourselves if we want to be that forward-thinking department. So that's my goal, and regardless of what terms or what words people associate with it, we want to be transparent with the community. We want to engage the community and make sure that we're taking steps together throughout this process, and that's what this is going to allow for.
Mayor, if I could, you talk about engaging the community. The leaders of Black Lives Rhode Island have said that they haven't been engaged as part of this process. Do you have a response to that?
So, as part of the engagement with PFM, we're also bringing together. There are 2 artists who are going to lead this process, and so they are artists that are also trained in community engagement. So, we expect to reach out to everyone, and we ask everyone to participate broadly in this. Whether you've been on the front lines calling for change with respect to public safety, or if you've been more quiet and just watching it more from the sidelines, we need everyone's voice to be involved in this process. And the 2 artists who we've engaged will be reaching out broadly and inviting everyone to share their voice.
And if I could, how much is this going to cost, the review? And also, I know the police union will say they're short-staffed as it is, and that some of these social program and collaboratives are already in place in the department and have been for years.
So this is not costing the city a single cent. all of this is covered by PFM, who has philanthropic support for this project.
And just again on the union, basically saying that they're short-staffed as it is, and a lot of some of these programs, with social service agencies have been in place for a long time, and they're already doing some of this stuff.
Oh, we're absolutely doing some of it, but we're not doing it anywhere near at the scale that's required. And I've been on some of those runs with the police officers where I've seen family services come in and I've seen the work that they do. But I've also been on runs with police officers where, it would have been great to have more man and woman power from family services or from these other institutions that could have provided support on the scene. So yes, we are doing it, but there is need for more. And, I think that, as we go through this process, I think that you'll also hear from law enforcement themselves that some of the runs that they go on, some of the calls that they go on, it's not the best use of their time. So, for example, if someone is having a mental episode and police officers go, my hat's off to the officers who respond. They do their best, and oftentimes they're able to manage the situation very skillfully. But they're not trained professionals to handle someone who is suicidal at that moment. And perhaps being able to deploy a mental health professional can better respond to that incident. I think that police officers themselves, they would agree that not only could someone else provide that service better than a police officer, but second, if someone else is providing that service, it frees them up to do police work that they are specifically trained and they are the most capable folks to take on. So this is definitely something that, as it comes together, I can see it. I can see it freeing up time so that officers can spend more time doing the work that only they can perform, which I believe would be a net gain and a victory for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. We've got Madeline List. Madeline, I'm going to unmute you.
Hi, Mayor. Do you have a comment on the protest that happened last night, and do you have a message for those protesters?
Yeah, I think that first and foremost, we understand the anger. We understand the rage. When I think about the history of injustices against the Black community, not just here in our city, but in our country, and especially when you see the injustices that play out on these videos in front of our screens, and when conduct after conduct goes unpunished, I can understand that rage. However, I ask everyone to remember that violence only begets more violence. Violence is never, ever the answer. And so, we want to provide the channels for people to, take that anger and channel it in a very constructive and a positive way. We've been leading the way here in the city of Providence for 20 years. And by no means are we perfect. By no means are we spiking the football, but we've made progress. And we ask you to be part of this process so we can make more progress and we can continue to be on the front lines and be a forward-thinking public safety department. There is a better way, but please don't let that violence and anger consume you. At a personal level, I have seen how that anger just becomes you, and it makes it very difficult for you to see beyond that immediate anger. That only brings us down collectively, and it only poisons us inside individually. There is a better way, and we want to provide those avenues to channel that anger in very constructive ways. And I hope that you'll engage in this process so we can make progress together.
Are you concerned specifically about protesters getting onto the highway? And is that something that you're concerned about seeing again or in larger numbers in the future?
Yeah, we're always concerned about any time that protesters either put themselves or others at risk. So, we've seen just really horrible, horrific incidences in other places where folks have gone onto the highway and, cars just don't stop. So, we want to protect people's First Amendment right to protest, and we will continue to do so. But we ask folks to not put themselves or others at risk. And so, once it crosses into that line, we will do what we can to bring safety back to the situation. So that's always a concern. But we ask folks, please don't put yourself or others at risk, and please be a part of this solution with us so that we can make progress together.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. We got Steph came back around with another question. Steph?
Hi, just one more thing, Mayor. Reminded me of it when Brian mentioned that the union would say that they are short-staffed. You proposed in your budget for additional funding for police to have a 50-person academy starting in February. Do you still support doing that?
So we're hoping to have that decision informed by the progress of this process. So I can see two different worlds, and it really depends on what we get from this process. So, for example, if we are successful in shifting some of the responsibilities away from public safety, and it frees up our officers to be able to dedicate their time more in public safety and respond to calls much more effectively, then perhaps there is no need for the full class that we anticipated. However, if we do make these changes, but it's going to take time to implement, and we're still going to need those additional officers, well, then I'm open to that as well. But like I said, this process is going to be really important because it's going to arm us with the information that we need to make those important strategic decisions.